In this edition of the Plain Facts, we'll be taking an historical slice from the ancestors of today's cutting-edge VTOLs. And we'll look at some of the people behind and involved with the amazing P-47 Thunderbolt. These are the Plain Facts. Most of the world's frontline fighters have heritages that date back to the mid-1960s. This is also true regarding the West's only vertical takeoff and landing fighter, the Harrier jump jet. Of all the fighters in service during the last half of last century, it is the Harrier that was one of the most radical. But as the clock moves us forward into this new century, new thoroughbred fighters are emerging, and the Harrier's replacement is an outstanding technical achievement. Lockheed's lineup of the three variants of the Joint Strike Fighter, or JSF, is an example of the next generation of strike aircraft. And the Stovall version is perhaps the most visually exciting. This craft was developed to take over the Harrier's role. So far, the JSF has commitments from the US Air Force, the US Navy, the US Marine Corps, and the British Royal Navy. The story of VTOL aircraft begins way back in time. The Hawker P-1127 was a single-jet engine plane and was the first real and workable VTOL. It was a pioneer that showed the world that a jet aircraft could take off and land like a helicopter, yet reach jet fighter speeds. This later P-1127 was called a Kestrel, and its first flight took place during March 1964, 3.5 years after the first tentative hover of the original P-1127. In horizontal flight, it performed admirably against the full-blown fighters of the day, but it could also make a vertical landing, and this was the real strength of the craft. At the Farnborough Air Show, two Kestrels showed a stunned crowd what they could do. They outperformed a Hunter fighter jet. They beat the Hunter in speed, range, and rate of climb. The breakthrough to achieving reliable VTOL was the Pegasus engine. It was designed by the Bristol Siddeley Company, which became part of Rolls-Royce in 1966. The uniqueness of the engine was 4 rotatable nozzles that determined the aircraft's direction. The single-jet engine was about 8 foot long. However, for its day, it was extremely powerful. It generated about 21,500 pounds of thrust. With the nozzle unit already in place, the engine was lowered into the airframe. To give the plane maximum hover and landing manoeuvrability, the nozzles were arranged with 2 forward of the plane's centre of gravity and 2 rearward. 2 compressed air-driven motors were employed to drive a system of rods and chains, which moved all 4 nozzles in unison. Their full rotation is 99 degrees, and they can achieve that in 1 second. By mid-1960s, P-1127s and Kestrels made hundreds of VTOLs in a variety of conditions and environments, such as water-sodden runways, deserts, and grass fields. It was learned that some conditions weren't suitable for VTOLs. Engine exhaust from a Harrier's underbelly vents can kick up large pieces of material that can get sucked into the craft's air intake, and this virtually chokes the engine. The craft loses lift and crashes to the ground. However, the pilots of the planes were already able to conduct STOs, or short takeoffs, which proved to be a better proposition than VTOLs. The standard form of operation for the planes was short takeoff and vertical landing. At air shows, Kestrels were a crowd pleaser. A number of fast passes and a few aerobatics, the Kestrels then showed the crowd their real capability. At low levels, the pilots used puffer jets, which are located on the wingtips, nose and tail. The jets use highly compressed air to allow the plane to perform pitches, pirouettes, rolls or just hover. All these can be performed even in strong winds. Like the Kestrels, the JSF-35 will undoubtedly be an air show favourite. The Antonov 124 is really a giant among giants. On its maiden flight in December 1982, it was the largest powered craft to fly. The Antonov is still the world's largest heavy lift aircraft. The vital statistics of the AN model include a payload capacity of 330,000 pounds, a cruising speed of 469 miles per hour, and a range of 24,000 miles when fully loaded. Testimony to its capability is an entry in the Guinness Book of Records of an Antonov carrying a 135-ton payload. It is recorded as the heaviest single cargo to be carried by air. The 124 is capable of front and rear loading or even drive-off and drive-on loading, which was originally designed for military use. The front wheels retract, allowing the AH-124 to kneel, hence reducing the angle of the front ramp. This attribute permits large vehicles complete with their load to be driven on board and transported as a unit. It's a military design that has helped establish a new segment of the air freight market, the transportation of oversized and very heavy cargoes. At air shows, the 124's size and handsome appearance always draws crowds. The size of the cargo hold is approximately 131 feet long and 20 feet wide. Its overall length is 227 feet and has a wingspan of 240 feet. The crew of 6 consists of 2 pilots, 2 engineers, a navigator and a radio operator. 34 onboard computers assist the crew with all facets of their daily operations. The 124 Antonov and the American C-5 Galaxy are the first true giant cargo carriers. The technology to progress to larger craft is available. However, hangar sizes, parking bay sizes and runway lengths also determine how big we can go. Surprisingly, the largest aircraft ever built would dwarf the 124 Antonov. Airships took to the skies around 1900. At that time, the aeroplane was a very basic contraption that offered very little payload. Von Zeppelin is regarded as the father of the airship, and by the outbreak of World War I, his Zeppelins could achieve 85 miles per hour, reach a height of 14,000 feet and carry 4,500 pounds of bombs. Von Zeppelin's success inspired many countries to develop airship technology. The United States Navy was also inspired and went on to build the Shenandoah, Akron and the Macon. The airships served the Navy well, but their time was running out as advancements in aircraft was moving quickly. Unfortunately, many regard the airship as relatively unsuccessful. Perhaps newspaper images depicting wrecks and fireballs such as these of the Shenandoah imprinted strong feelings of skepticism in the public mind. The truth is that many airships were built and flown successfully. There were some spectacular accidents, but few lives were lost. Perhaps the public's natural skepticism of flight in general during the airship's reign is responsible for today's misunderstanding of these lighter-than-air giants. The airships of yesteryear are still the largest craft ever flown. The Hindenburg was over 820 feet long, and that is more than twice the length of anything we'll fly today. It could be said that the P-47 Thunderbolt was a Russian-designed plane. The aircraft was a product of two Russian immigrants, Alexander Seversky and Alexander Kartveli, who had left their homeland to escape the Reds. Seversky was an extremely colourful character. He became a naval aviator in the Tsar's forces in World War I. He lost a leg early in the conflict, but returned to the air with an artificial leg and claimed 13 kills in combat. In 1918, after the October Revolution of 1917, Seversky was sent to the US as part of a military mission. Having no confidence in the new regime, he decided to stay in America and become an aeronautical engineer. Seversky obtained American citizenship in 1927, and during 1931 he founded Seversky Aircraft Company. The company was very small, with Seversky acting as president, designer and test pilot. But he also hired a fellow Russian expatriate named Alexander Kartveli as design engineer. He was an original designer with many innovative ideas, and eventually became chief designer when Seversky became preoccupied with the business aspects of running the company. Seversky gathered momentum for his company by participating in the Bendix series of craft races during the 1930s. It's interesting to note that in the early days of air shows, the biggest attractions were the air races, and the builders of planes like Seversky continually outperformed the best military planes. Seversky had one of the most notable aviators in history to fly his planes, Jackie Cochran. She was a consistent winner and record setter in the Bendix series. Seversky's planes went on to win 3 Bendix titles, and Jackie Cochran went on to do much more. In 1943, during the war, she was the director of the WASPs, Women's Air Force Service Pilots Program. Their job was to fly the planes from the factories to the place of shipment for active duty. At this time, some women also test flew the aircraft. Here at the Grumman factory, women are test flying the Hellcat. Through this program, Jackie Cochran was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for services to her country during World War II. During the war years, much competition flying was put on hold. However, with so many surplus warbirds available after the war, a sport known as pylon racing became very popular with both pilots and spectators. Today, there are many classes of racing, but it is still the warbirds of the Second World War that many people find most interesting, if not romantic. In this instance, 2 Sea Furies are competing against a Strike Master. It is possible that this is the first time propeller planes have been faced off with a jet. It becomes apparent that the early jets did have a substantial speed advantage over the internal combustion engines. However, the Sea Furies are displaying an ability to hold a much tighter turn than a jet. Pylon racing involves planes racing around a series of pylons which are placed in the ground. The rules are very simple. The first plane to complete a given number of laps is the winner. The sport is very popular in the USA, and it's possible that this particular event, which was held in the Australian state of Tasmania, was the first ever pylon racing event held outside the United States. This sport is the fastest motorsport in the world, and just like any other motorsport, engine breakdowns occur. Unlike a car which simply rolls to a stop after a breakdown, planes lose altitude, which places the pilot in a life-threatening situation. This plane has just suffered a malfunction and pulls out of the race. After the race, the pilot admitted that he would not have been able to keep the plane in the air for more than a further 10 seconds. Notice the front wheel wobble when the plane lands? It's the engine vibration that's causing this wobble. It was a close call like this one that made Seversky consider giving up competition flying. Also, the US military disapproved, as they were not keen to lose Seversky's talent to a crash. Now here's just a couple of interesting facts on the C-130 Hercules. The initial production model was the C-130A. It had 4 Allison T56A11 or 9 turboprops, and the first prototype flew in 1954. The first production flight followed on April 7, 1955. A total of 219 were ordered, and the C-130A joined the US Air Force infantry in December 1956. This aircraft is still in production today, but not one piece of the original design is found in the latest J model. The C-130 has more variants than any other aircraft in history. The C-130B used upgraded Allison T56A7 turboprops. The original 3-bladed propellers were replaced by 4-bladed units. The first of 134 entered Air Force service in April-June 1959. The B model carried additional fuel in the wings and had strengthened landing gear. More and more was being asked of the Hercules, and the runways it was required to use were very substandard and often very short. Lockheed fitted JATO, or Jet Assisted Takeoff, to the E model, and this reduced takeoff from 1,500 feet to about 800 feet. Vietnam really proved what a great aircraft Lockheed had produced. An example of the C-130's abilities can be found in the history of the Marine base at Khe Sanh. In early 1968, the Communists surrounded the Marine base. This footage demonstrates the amount of action that occurred right through the perimeter of the base. As a consequence, the base became completely shut off by the Communist forces. The Marines desperately depended upon the C-130s to maintain a supply line. The preferred method of delivery was to drop the supplies from the air to reduce the chance of the C-130 coming under fire. Sometimes the weather conditions prevented visual airdrops, so Marines radar guided C-130s to the general runway area. Only then could the aircraft crew visually fly to the designated drop zone. The drop zone was a mere 300 square foot area, and the C-130 crews successfully dropped up to 200 tons of supply a day into this small area. When the weather was clearer, the C-130s were constantly under fire during landings and takeoffs. Although a lot of drop-offs could be the container delivery type, the C-130's crews often placed themselves in danger by landing for the purpose of medi evacuations. During the Vietnam War, the C-130 was also used very efficiently as a bomber. Converting the Hercules to a bomber required only a few slight modifications, primarily the addition of radio reception capabilities to the loadmaster's interphone station in the cargo compartment. The C-130 loadmaster would actually release the load, an operation that gave them the distinction of being the only enlisted men in the Air Force to release an aerial weapon. The bombs were delivered using modified heavy drop techniques. Not only did the impact zone become enemy-free, the cleared area could be used by helicopters to ferry in troops. These clearings were very safe for the troops, as everything within a mile of the blast was either killed or temporarily incapacitated by the explosion. The C-130 bombers had a reputation for accuracy, exceeding that of all other aircraft dropping bombs during the Vietnam War. Because the delivery of the huge weapons required no modification to the C-130, a crew could drop 2 bombs in the morning and then spend the remainder of their day shuttling into a nearby forward airfield delivering ammunition, fuel, or other supplies for the troops. These duties demonstrated the versatility of the C-130, as they were the bombers in the morning and the transport in the afternoon.